The president said he would release the video.
Will you release video of that strike so that the American people can see for themselves what happened?
I don't know what they have, but whatever they have, we'd certainly release, no problem.
But today, when I asked him, a different story.
Mr. President, you said you would have no problem with releasing the full video of that strike on September 2nd off the coast of Venezuela. Secretary Hegseth now says...
You said that. I didn't say that. This is ABC fake news.
You said that you would have no problem releasing the full bit. Okay, well, Secretary Hegseth...
No, whatever Hegseth wants to do is okay with me.
Over the weekend, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth would not commit to releasing the video.
Whatever we were to decide to release, we'd have to be very responsible about. So we're reviewing that right now.
A source tells ABC News the survivors were clinging to the capsized boat, that at one point they appeared to wave at something overhead. Democrats say the administration doesn't want the American people to see that the military fired on shipwrecked sailors in violation of the rules of law.
I think it's really important that people see what it looks like when the full force of the United States military is turned.
You just watched Donald Trump lie directly to your face and then have his defense secretary scramble to clean up the mess. And here's the thing that should make your blood absolutely boil. The thing that should wake you up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat. The thing that reveals the entire rotting architecture of authoritarian power consolidation happening right before our eyes in real time. This isn't about a contradictory statement or a political flip-flop or even just another lie from a president who lies like he breathes. No, no, no. This is about the systematic erasure of accountability for what multiple Democratic lawmakers who have seen the classified footage are calling one of the most disturbing acts they've witnessed in their entire careers in public service. The video of the second strike showing two men sitting without shirts atop a capsized boat wreckage, who were then killed. And we need to talk about what this represents in the broader constellation of authoritarianism, because friends, this goes so much deeper than you think. The military conducted a second strike killing two survivors after the first boat attack, prompting calls for investigations and concerns in Congress that the follow-up strike may have constituted a war crime. And when I tell you that the laws of war have been crystal clear on this point for over a century, I mean that quite literally, because the landmark 1921 case clearly set forth the rule that killing shipwrecked survivors of a boat strike is a war crime, and that superior orders offer no defense to such conduct because such orders must be disobeyed. This isn't some ambiguous gray area that requires extensive legal parsing. This is foundational to the entire edifice of international humanitarian law, the very framework that emerged from the ashes of World War II when the world looked at the horrors of industrial warfare and said never again. And yet here we are watching Trump deny he ever promised transparency, while Trump said Wednesday he would release whatever video footage the administration has of the Sept 2 strike that killed two survivors, only to turn around and claim he never said that, calling it ABC fake news in the most predictable authoritarian playbook move imaginable, the Orwellian memory holing of his own words captured on camera just days earlier. But wait, because it gets worse, and you need to understand the machinery of impunity being constructed here piece by piece, bolt by bolt. The Washington Post reported that the second strike left two survivors who clung to the boat's wreckage before dying in a follow-on attack, and that the second strike was conducted because Hegseth ordered everybody to be killed. Yet Hegseth has said he authorized the first strike, but that military commander Admiral Frank Mem Bradley approved the second, creating this perfect accountability shell game where responsibility gets passed around like a hot potato until it disappears entirely into the bureaucratic ether. This is how war crimes get laundered through the apparatus of power. This is how atrocity becomes policy, becomes just another day at the office, and the fact that Hegseth cited fabricated inflammatory and derogatory reporting, and the White House confirmed the second strike shortly after those denials, tells you everything you need to know about the contempt this administration holds for truth itself as a concept. And here's where the historical echoes should be deafening to anyone paying attention, because in the Pacific Theater in World War II, certain Japanese naval units adopted no survivors policies, killing Allied sailors adrift at sea, while the U.S. Navy explicitly rejected this approach, and the U.S. State Department protested this inhuman form of warfare practiced by Japanese forces in brutally attacking helpless survivors, which are contrary to all standards of civilized conduct. We prosecuted people for this exact conduct. We held war crimes tribunals. We established the moral and legal framework that said targeting shipwrecked sailors is beyond the pale of acceptable warfare, and in the 1945 Peleus trial, a British military court considered a March 1944 incident in which a German submarine sank a Greek ship, and upon the orders of the German commander, the U-boat members fired a machine gun and threw grenades at crew members who had survived the first attack, but were shipwrecked in the water, and those men were convicted of war crimes. They were held accountable, and now we're watching an American administration potentially recreate those exact scenarios while the president lies about promising to release the evidence. The layers of constitutional crisis stacking on top of each other here are genuinely staggering when you step back and look at the full picture, because Smith said the video shows two men sitting without shirts atop a portion of a capsized boat that was still above water, which badly undermines the story Hegseth has told, as he said he did not see the two men before the second strike was ordered, suggesting both that he'd gone off to do other things, and that the fog of war had prevented a clear viewing of the two men, but the two men were very visible, so the fog of war line appears to be nonsense. These were human beings, not abstract targets on a screen, human beings clinging to wreckage in international waters. Representative Himes said people need to see what it looks like when the full force of the United States military is turned on two guys who are clinging to a piece of wood and about to go under, and the visceral horror of that image, the fundamental inhumanity of executing shipwrecked sailors, should shock the conscience of anyone who claims to care about American values. Now let's talk about the broader context of militarization and executive power, because this boat strike controversy isn't happening in isolation. Oh no, it's part of a comprehensive strategy to normalize the use of military force in ways that shatter decades of legal constraints and democratic norms. The Trump administration's national security strategy categorizes cartels including Tren de Aragua as foreign terrorist organizations, which provides the legal authority for military engagement and authorizes targeted deployments and the use of lethal force. But here's the thing that should terrify you. In September and October 2025, the U.S. military commenced airstrikes and naval operations against vessels in the Caribbean and Eastern Pacific, suspected of trafficking narcotics, with Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth confirming strikes against alleged drug vessels, including an operation on October 24, 2025, that killed 6 men suspected of being Tren de Aragua operatives, and suspected as doing an enormous amount of work in that sentence because U.S. officials have not provided specific evidence that the vessels were smuggling drugs or posed a threat to the U.S. This administration is claiming the authority to execute people without trial, without due process, based on intelligence they won't share, in operations they won't adequately explain, and when pressed for the legal justification they hide behind classified opinions and operational security. The video is currently classified and only top congressional lawmakers have seen it, but there is bipartisan support to release the full video of the controversial strikes, and Senate Intelligence Chairman Tom Cotton said he didn't have a problem with the video being made public. Yet, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth on Saturday declined to commit to releasing video of a controversial second strike, saying they're reviewing it right now to make sure sources, methods, and it's an ongoing operation with operators out there doing this right now. Which is just another way of saying we don't want you to see what we did, because if you saw it you'd be horrified. And the institutional resistance tells you everything, because there is increasing scrutiny of Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's role in the boat strikes, and the former Fox News anchor's lack of experience, abrasive manner, and rejection of some of the military's ethical and legal safeguards is threatening to make him a political burden for the president as Democrats demand his resignation. This is someone who questioned the utility of the Geneva Conventions during his confirmation, and argued that America should fight by its own rules while dismissing concerns as woke interpretations of warfare, and now legislators are grappling with the reality of a defense secretary who may view international law as an obstacle rather than a framework. The through line couldn't be clearer. Install ideologues who view legal constraints as impediments, give them authority over lethal force, and then when the inevitable atrocities occur, simply deny, and attack anyone who demands accountability. But let's zoom out even further, because this is all part of Trump's second-term project of domestic militarization that should alarm anyone who understands the historical trajectory of Democratic backsliding. In 2025, federal government forces, primarily National Guard troops, have been deployed in select U.S. cities, and Trump has given multiple explanations, saying they are officially part of crackdowns on protests, crime, homelessness, and illegal immigration, while the actions targeted Democratic Party-led cities and sparked controversy, with critics labeling them as abuses of power and potential violations of laws like the Posse Comitatus Act, and Trump ordered the deployment of National Guard into Washington, D.C., and federalized D.C.'s Metropolitan Police Department, despite violent crime at a 30-year low. Because this was never about public safety. This was always about the projection and consolidation of power. The pattern is unmistakable when you connect the dots. During a September 30 meeting, Trump told over 800 generals and admirals that the deployments should be used as training grounds for our military, and described America as waging a war from within, saying America is under invasion from within, and that it's no different than a foreign enemy, but more difficult in many ways because they don't wear uniforms. This is the language of internal enemies, the rhetoric of authoritarian regimes that view their own citizens as threats to be neutralized. And when you combine domestic troop deployments with extrajudicial killings in international waters and systematic lying about transparency, what you get is a comprehensive assault on the rule of law itself. The legal gymnastics required to justify these strikes would be laughable if the stakes weren't so horrifying, because in a letter to Congress, the Pentagon said Trump had determined that the U.S. is in an armed conflict with drug cartels his administration has designated as terrorist organizations, and that smugglers for the cartels are unlawful combatants, but violating international law undermines the moral legitimacy underpinning current and future U.S. military operations, as moral legitimacy is a strategic asset, not a nice extra. And when the United States abides by the laws of war, it strengthens its ability to shape global expectations, sustain coalitions, and demand humane treatment for its own forces. But if the United States authorizes the killing of defenseless survivors, it sends a clear message that the United States does not take maritime law, fundamental human rights, or the law of armed conflict seriously. This isn't just about abstract principles. This is about the safety of American service members who will face retaliation when our adversaries point to our own violations and say you did it first. And speaking of American service members, let's talk about the constitutional crisis Pete Hegseth himself helped create. Because here's a delicious irony that reveals the utter bankruptcy of this administration's position. In 2016, Pete Hegseth sounded the alarm about then-presidential candidate Donald Trump's statements that he would order U.S. troops to carry out potentially illegal orders as commander-in-chief, and at the time Hegseth repeatedly warned that service members had a duty to refuse illegal orders, even from the president, saying you're not just going to follow that order if it's unlawful, and the military's not going to follow illegal orders. Let me repeat that because it bears repeating. Hegseth in 2016 explicitly warned that Trump might issue illegal orders and said the military wouldn't follow them, and now as defense secretary he's attacking Democrats for urging troops to reject illegal orders and branded 6 Democratic lawmakers who urged U.S. service members to disobey illegal orders, the seditious 6 accusing them of spreading despicable, reckless, and false information. The sheer Orwellian audacity of attacking people for saying what you yourself once said, of criminalizing the very warnings you once issued, tells you everything about how power corrupts and how ideology bends reality. And Trump went even further, because Trump suggested that Democratic lawmakers, who urged service members and intelligence officials to disobey illegal orders, should be put to death, writing seditious behavior punishable by death, and that each one of these traitors to our country should be arrested and put on trial, while also reposting posts that read "Hang them, George Washington would." This is the President of the United States calling for the execution of members of Congress, for reminding the military of their constitutional obligations, for restating what the law actually says, and if that doesn't chill you to your core, then you haven't been paying attention to how democracies die. The Democratic lawmakers responded with exactly the kind of principled courage we need more of, because their joint statement said they will not be intimidated, and that what's most telling is that the President considers it punishable by death for them to restate the law, and that service members should know that we have their backs as they fulfill their oath to the Constitution and obligation to follow only lawful orders. This is what actual patriotism looks like. This is what defending the Constitution against enemies foreign and domestic actually means in practice, not the performative flag-waving jingoism of the right, but the hard, dangerous work of standing up to executive overreach, even when threatened with violence. And let's talk about the cover-up, because that's what this video controversy ultimately represents. A systematic attempt to prevent the American people from seeing evidence of potential war crimes committed in their name. Congress is trying to amp up pressure on Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth over operations conducted against alleged drug boats in the Caribbean by threatening to withhold a portion of his travel budget unless he turns over videos of the strikes to the Armed Services Committees, as the provision says that Hegseth must turn over video of strikes conducted against designated terrorist organizations in the area of responsibility of the United States Southern Command, which is a remarkable development because it shows even some Republicans understand that something deeply wrong occurred, and transparency is essential. Representative Adam Smith said it seems pretty clear they don't want to release this video because they don't want people to see it, because it's very, very difficult to justify, and when you're hiding evidence because you know it will horrify the public, that's a pretty good sign you've crossed moral and legal lines that shouldn't be crossed. The comparison to historical war crimes prosecutions should be front and center in this discussion, because in the Peleus trial, the judge advocate stated that the duty to obey is limited to the observance of orders, which are lawful, and there can be no duty to obey that which is not a lawful order. And this principle was established precisely to prevent the kind of defense we're seeing now, where Hegseth claims he authorized the general operation, but Admiral Bradley made the specific decision to kill the survivors. The military officials stressed in the briefing that Hegseth never directly ordered them to kill them all, but they did say that Hegseth's declared mission was to kill all 11 people with Smith, noting it was destroy the drugs, kill all 11 people on board, and it is not that inaccurate to say that the rules of engagement from Hegseth were kill all 11 people on that boat, and so by all indications that second strike appears to have been ordered to comply with Hegseth's command. This is the kind of diffusion of responsibility that war crimes trials were designed to pierce through. The idea that you can give broad lethal orders and then claim innocence when subordinates carry them out. And the fact that Senator Warner said that once you make the claim about war crimes, proven it reflects not only on Pete Hegseth and the Trump administration, but on the admiral involved, and the status of American military and how we are viewed in the world, and he's very, very, very troubled while trying to hold back final judgment, but indicated this is a very chilling video, tells you that even senators with access to classified briefings, and every inclination to give the administration the benefit of the doubt, are deeply disturbed by what they've seen. The timeline of dissembling and contradiction is important to document because it reveals the deliberate strategy of obfuscation. The administration can't seem to get its story straight, and repeatedly over the last week plus its account of events has changed. Which is what happens when you're not telling the truth, when you're trying to manage a scandal rather than simply explaining what happened and why it was justified. Trump gave mixed signals with Trump last weekend, before the administration publicly confirmed the second strike, saying, "No, I wouldn't have wanted that." Not a second strike, but after the White House confirmed the second strike, Trump adopted a more supportive posture, saying, "I support the decision to knock out the boats, and whoever is piloting those boats, most of them are gone. But whoever are piloting those boats, they're guilty of trying to kill people in our country." The president's position literally changed based on whether the second strike had been publicly acknowledged, which tells you his statements aren't based on principle or facts, but on political calculation about what he can get away with. Now let's talk about the international implications because the thin domestic political underpinnings of Trump's campaign are growing more fragile as the White House fails to quell a growing controversy over the follow-up U.S. strike that reportedly killed surviving crew members of an alleged drugs trafficking boat, while Trump's Venezuela regime change adventure is in danger of degenerating into a strategic political and legal morass. Experts say the 15,000 U.S. troops based on warships in the Caribbean are not enough to take control of Venezuela. But Trump's threatening rhetoric combined with these boat strikes is creating exactly the kind of nationalist backlash that tends to strengthen authoritarian leaders like Maduro, rather than weaken them. This is geopolitics conducted by someone whose understanding of military force begins and ends with the spectacle of violence, the performance of strength without any coherent strategy for achieving actual objectives. The lack of evidence undergirding these strikes should be screaming from every headline because the use of lethal military force against drug boats is unprecedented, with past administrations relying on law enforcement to interdict drug shipments, and there's a reason for that precedent. There's a reason we distinguish between military operations in war zones and law enforcement operations against criminal activity. The Trump administration alleged that the vessels were operated by groups it designated as narco-terrorists, including the Venezuelan terrorist organization Tren de Aragua and the Colombian far-left guerrilla group National Liberation Army, but has not publicized any evidence for the allegations, and as of December 4, 2025, at least 87 people have been killed in 22 strikes on 23 vessels, which means we're talking about a sustained campaign of lethal force based on secret intelligence against targets we're told are drug traffickers, but have no way to independently verify. The Democratic response has been appropriately fierce, but we need to be clear about what's at stake here beyond any single incident. Trump's Democratic critics on Capitol Hill are warning of a potential war crime, and several powerful Republicans are shaken and are signaling a rare willingness to rigorously investigate the administration, which is encouraging but also terrifying because it reveals how far outside normal bounds this administration is operating, that even Republicans who typically rubber stamp everything Trump does are expressing concern. The bipartisan nature of the alarm should tell us something about the severity of what occurred, about how obviously problematic this strike was, and yet we're still seeing the administration stonewall on releasing the full video evidence. And here's where we need to connect this to the broader assault on truth and accountability, because one of the biggest questions with these strikes is just how solid the intelligence is, given the administration is killing people without due process, and the fact that it can't consistently describe where a boat was headed would seem inauspicious. This gets to the heart of extrajudicial killing as a practice. The fact that without judicial review, without adversarial proceedings, without the basic safeguards we associate with justice, you inevitably end up with mistakes, with innocent people killed, with abuses of power that compound over time. And when you add systematic lying on top of that foundation of extrajudicial killing, what you get is state-sanctioned murder with impunity, which is about as far from American values as you can possibly get. The evolution of this scandal perfectly illustrates how authoritarian governance works in practice. Commit the act, deny it happened, attack journalists who report on it, shift the story when evidence emerges, claim everything was legal and proper, refuse to release evidence that would prove otherwise, and finally attack anyone who demands accountability as traitors and seditionists. The Sep 20 attack has come under growing scrutiny by lawmakers in recent days, prompting calls for the footage to be made public, but Trump said last week that his administration would certainly release video of the follow-up strike no problem, while Hegseth on Saturday was more non-committal, saying that officials were reviewing whether to release the footage because we've got operators out there doing this right now. So whatever we were to decide, the release we'd have to be very responsible about it, which is bureaucratic doublespeak for we're never releasing this unless forced to by Congress or courts. So when you watch that clip of Trump denying he ever promised to release the video, when you see him call ABC fake news for accurately quoting his own words from days earlier, when you witness Hegseth passing responsibility to Bradley who points back to Hegseth's original orders, when you hear Republicans and Democrats who have seen the classified video using words like disturbing and chilling and troubling, when you recognize that we're talking about the execution of shipwrecked sailors in violation of laws established after we prosecuted Nazi war criminals, when you understand that this is happening alongside domestic troop deployments and threats to execute members of Congress, and a comprehensive campaign to place loyalists throughout the military and intelligence apparatus, then you start to grasp the full scope of the constitutional crisis we're living through. Senator Warner said he thinks the entire video ought to be shown not only to Congress, but the American public, and at the end of the day, he doesn't believe we would have had this if we'd had a Secretary of Defense that had experience, competency, and leadership, and showed basic respect to our military, and this video needs to be seen by the American public because it is beyond chilling. The American people deserve to see what's being done in their name. They deserve to judge for themselves whether the execution of shipwrecked sailors comports with their values. They deserve transparency from a government that claims to represent them, and the fact that Trump lied about promising that transparency tells you he knows exactly how damning that evidence is. This isn't just another scandal to be managed and moved past. This is a fundamental test of whether laws and norms and basic human decency mean anything at all in Trump's America. And right now the administration is failing that test spectacularly while lying about it to our faces. The fight for that video, the fight for accountability, the fight to ensure that American military power is subject to legal and moral constraints rather than the whims of an authoritarian president and his ideologically captured defense secretary, that fight is nothing less than the fight for the soul of American democracy itself, and we cannot afford to lose.